Dr. Todak is an assistant professor from the University of Alabama at Birmingham, and she's going to be sharing with us results of a recent survey and research project that she conducted. She has almost 1,000 survey responses from women officers across the country, as well as 54 in-depth interviews. And really the goal of the research was to better understand what are the barriers to women who are seeking promotion in the police profession, and how can departments best address these barriers moving forward. So I also have to say Dr. Todak is just about to leave for maternity leave. So we're so grateful we were able to schedule this webinar right at the very end, but huge congratulations to you and your family.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Does that look good? Whoop.
It looked good.
Well, it's blocking my notes now. I should practice that. Oh, okay.
It's funny, yeah.
Isn't it nice to like come up for air and do something different?
I'm sorry. I don't know how to do this without blocking my notes.
If you're not full screen, that's okay. We can still see it pretty well.
Well, there's probably a good button to hit, but all right, let me do this. Sorry about that. While
No
I'm
worries.
introducing myself, I'll pull up my other notes. So my name is Natalie Todak. I'm an associate professor in the Department of Criminal Justice at the University of Alabama at Birmingham. I am predominantly a policing scholar, and one of my main research interests is women in policing. And today I'm going to be discussing some results from a mixed methods study that I've been working on since 2019 on the underrepresentation of women in police leadership. And just my goal here is to provide kind of a super brief introduction to each strand of the project. So I apologize if I'm not doing a deep dive into each question, but I'm happy to talk later, talk via email, or share any of the publications with you. Is this good now, Mo? You can see everything?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so like everyone on this call is perhaps well aware of, women are very underrepresented in US policing. And I apologize to Shelley, these are a couple years old, so maybe she can chime in and edit these numbers a little bit for me, but the representation is exceptionally low, largely stagnant, and this is a very important problem for all of us because there is evidence, as you can see in the right column there, that promoting more women in policing could offer a range of benefits for other officers, for organizations, for communities, and for improving the quality of police services delivered to citizens. So the goals for this project were to investigate this gender gap, to understand any gendered challenges faced by women as they navigate the promotions process and when serving in their positions as leaders, and to make any recommendations for addressing these problems. And I want to note that this particular research project can't answer any questions about the impact of promoting more women, just because the nature of the data is self-report measures from women officers. So with the help of my collaborators, Renee Mitchell and Rachel Tolber, I took a mixed methods approach to this study. I collected surveys from a large nationally representative sample of women police officers and a smaller sample of interviews where promoted women were oversampled because their experiences are not commonly included in the research on women in policing. And the goal of using a mixed methods approach was to ask similar questions to both of the samples, and then to use the qualitative data to kind of dig deeper and better understand the results of the quantitative survey data. So the first issue that I investigated in this project was the argument that we often hear that women are underrepresented in police leadership because most women don't want to promote. So I wanted to know, for example, do women only make up about 3% of police chiefs in the United States because about 3% of women are actually interested in promoting to chief? And as you can see in the first column, my colleagues and I found that there is a much larger percentage of women who are interested in pursuing a promotion than there are women actually pursuing a promotion, and women actually promoting. So this opting out theory is disproved in our sample of about 1,000 women police officers. Moving to the second column, I also asked participants to report the main reasons why they haven't yet promoted. And the most common answer you can see here was that they were postponing promotion, primarily because they didn't feel ready and wanted to gain more experience first. In this group, there was a lot of fear that they would be accused of favoritism if it was perceived that they were promoted too early. So the desire to postpone promotion was largely connected to a fear that the organization would react negatively if they were successful. The second most common reason for not promoting was due to a lack of interest in being a supervisor. And if you look at the third column, you can see that those women either wanted to stay in their current position, that was actually most commonly for childcare reasons, or they wanted to obtain a different assignment, such as a specialty position. So there's a lot that I could say about what these findings mean, but for now, what I'll say is, if you are a police agency looking for ways to promote more women officers, you should be wanting to know more about the women who are postponing simply due to fear of how they will be treated or how the organization will respond. And you should be wanting to know more about women who are keeping their entry-level positions solely for childcare reasons. Moving to the next study, I asked women who had promoted at least once in their career to talk to me about what they thought women had to offer as police leaders that they thought was unique or different compared to the ranking men in their agencies. And using a qualitative analytic approach, I grouped their responses into three main categories. The first is the idea that women offer diverse perspectives and ideas to policing that aren't necessarily better, just different. And more generally, the idea that women leaders serve as role models to other women officers and even prospective female recruits. Second, participants thought women leaders were more democratic with their officers. They were better listeners, had more compassion for their employees, and were more likely to recognize and praise good police work. And third, participants thought women were more apt to accept criticism, admit when they were wrong, and were more thoughtful and methodical with their decision-making. In the same study, I also looked at whether there were differences in how women and men performed their jobs as supervisors and leaders. So I asked participants to describe their supervisory and leadership styles. Then I used Robin Engel's supervisory style framework to classify all of the participants into one of her 4 categories. And I'm not going to read them out, but you can kind of look at the different styles here and read about them more in the paragraph below. And what you can see based on the percentages here is that the men who Engel analyzed for her study were spread out pretty evenly across the 4 groups. But in our study, we found that the majority of women, over 80%, were either innovative or supportive leaders. So this suggests that more women leaders are focused on training officers in ways that produce good outcomes, rather than focusing on numbers like arrests and citations. And women leaders are also more like doing the jobs that they think is the best way they can. So when talking about the underrepresentation of women in leadership, a common concern is the lack of ranking women available to mentor the next generations of women. So for this paper, my student and I measured the prevalence of mentorship among women in the survey sample. And we found, as you can see in that first column, about half of participants reported having at least one significant mentor in their career. Most had multiple mentors, and most said that they had had at least one mentor who was a woman. So the chance of a woman officer reporting having at least one mentor was about 50-50. However, we did not find that having a mentor, as you can see in the second column there, was significantly related to any of our measures of career achievement, such as promotion, peer acceptance, or career satisfaction. And in fact, participation in a formal mentorship program was negatively associated with the likelihood that a woman was promoted. So I looked at follow-up narrative responses that were written into the surveys to kind of explore this relationship with formal program participation. And women described that these formal programs are often pairing women with incompatible, ineffective, or old school mentors. And it was generally thought that mentor relationships that emerge more naturally are more beneficial because there's an increase in compatibility between the two people. I'll briefly just say on this slide that Jessica Huff and I conducted a quantitative test of the relationship between the composition of an organization's promotional exam and the likelihood that a woman either pursued a promotion or obtained a promotion. And we did not find that any of the individual exam components had a significant effect on either of those outcomes. So to follow up on that previous paper, I then analyzed narrative responses to the question, did you face any challenges during the promotions process? A small portion of the sample answered the question either by saying that the exam was fair between men and women, or that they did not face any challenges at all, like something like, I promoted every time I tried. Almost a third described some non-gendered challenges, such as the design of the exam or the amount of time that was necessary to study. But the focus of this paper was on the remainder of the responses that described gender-specific challenges that women faced when they navigated the promotions process. So based on a qualitative analysis of those responses, I grouped them into two categories. One describing gender biases inherent in the promotions process itself that negatively affected the women applicants. And then the second group was related to kind of organizational culture and biases within the larger culture that spilled into the promotions process. In the first group, gender bias in the process took on three forms. One, preferences given to men due to a buddy system that favored officers who knew or were friendly with the evaluators. Two, gender biases held by the evaluators who were most often all men. And three, difficulties experienced by working mothers who were attempting to balance their work, childcare, family life, and studying. And the big findings in this first category include 56 participants saying that the panel members expressed outward biases against women applicants, 30 participants saying that promotions is based on who you know and not on how you perform, and 20 participants calling the process specifically a good old boys club, which is why the title of the paper is called A Panel of Good Old Boys. In the second category, participants described how their organization's culture, kind of as a whole, doubted the leadership abilities of women, was openly hostile towards women who aspired to promote, accused successful women of benefiting from favoritism when they were promoted, and denied mentorship and assistance to women, which left them kind of on their own to prepare for the promotion exam. So I want to leave you with this slide here. I listed the recommendations for agencies that I made for agencies looking to reduce gender bias in their promotions process. And these are specifically based on the results that I just reviewed on the previous slide. I believe that all of these slides will be made available to all the participants today. And the full articles that I just reviewed, but if not, I can drop them in the chat like Shelley did, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have at the end of the webinar. Thank you very much.
Awesome. Natalie, thank you so much. It's always so wonderful learning from you. some of those results I think are pretty sobering, but not surprising. And I think there's also a lot of reasons for hope. So much of what it takes to address these kinds of inherent biases that we see in the field are pretty common sense fixes, some of which we address through the pledge. So thank you so much for that. I think that last slide is probably the most critical, and we absolutely will distribute your PowerPoints in our next 30 by 30 newsletter. So thank you so much for that. All right, now I'm going to turn things over to Dr. Nikki Smith-Kea. Again, no stranger to 30 by 30. And Dr. Kea most recently has been working with us, facilitating a lot of those focus groups that we've been having across the country in partnership with Mark 43 to better understand the experiences and priorities of women in policing. Dr. Smith-Kea is also a Stoneleigh Fellow and Executive in Residence with the Philadelphia Police Department. And she's going to be speaking with you about her dissertation research that explores the journey of women to the top executive positions. And it also did some great work around generating knowledge that helps create a path forward that may bolster advancement of women into these positions. So Dr. Smith-Kea, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mo. Thank you, everyone, for being here. Can you hear me okay?
We can indeed.
Okay. And thanks for the introduction. I'm here having anxiety about how do I distill my work in 12 slides. So let's go. I just put the link to my dissertation in the chat, so you have that. So again, thank you for the opportunity to be here. As Mo said, I'm Nicola Smith-Kea, and I'll be walking you through this amazing journey I had the fortunate experience to experience. Throughout the presentation, you will hear the voices of the participants as much as time will allow. And on some of the slides, there will be quotes that you can read on your own. So here's how the title came about, which is interesting. Participant 20 said, "I always put my bag on the seat next to me, Miss Nikki. And when someone says, 'Hey, is this seat taken?' I say, 'It is. I'm sorry.' And when I see a woman, whether I know her or not, I go, 'Hey, come. I've saved you a seat,' and I say, 'Save a seat for a sister. You have to be at the table or you'll be on the menu. We got this, girl.'" That became a movement of saving a seat for a sister, because research informs us that if you have 3 women on the board, it changes the conversation. So again, thank you for being here. I wanted to gain a better understanding. The reason I did this research, and I didn't focus on the challenges, because there are a number of studies out there that focus on the challenge that women experience. And by golly, we know what it is, right? So I wanted to gain a better understanding of the complex journey of women to top executive positions, and also to generate knowledge that can help to create a path that may bolster the advancement of women in top positions. I took a positive psychology approach to focus on the factors that elevated these women to the top. And this was a very intentional decision not to focus on the challenges women have experienced. As I mentioned just now, the unique barriers have been researched. So for this study, there was an explicit recognition, acceptance, and celebration that there are women who made it to the top. And the intent was to uncover these women, the factors, that help these women to survive and thrive on their respective journeys. And so I entered this research with one overarching question. What have been the experiences of women leaders in policing as they have progressed in the profession to executive ranks? And for the methodology, I use grounded theory in combination with situational analysis. I would encourage anyone not to do that. I'm still traumatized by it. So this was in order to really examine a phenomenon that is not well understood. We rarely see research that's looking at the factors as to what got women to the top. And the purpose was to generate new theory and conceptual propositions. The combination of these methodologies allowed for an examination of both the micro or individual level factors alongside the larger meso and macro or social level factors that from the women's perspective had been critical in their leadership experience and journey. And it helped to really untangle the dense complexity and the context. There were 21 diverse study participants located across 13 states in large, medium departments. And there was also a situational sample, and their voices weren't represented in, you'll see soon in the dimensional analysis, but more to give a sense of what is happening in the larger social circles. So throughout the grounded theory analysis, I was able to uncover micro or individual level factors which propelled these women to the top. From the very tedious data collection process, I interviewed 21 women. It doesn't sound like a lot, but I ended up with over 300 single-line, single-spaced pages. And for grounded theory, you're doing line-by-line analysis, meaning you're looking at every single line in every single interview. And what that allowed me, or what emerged from that, were 4 primary dimensions: wanting change, which is a core dimension, taking chances, making opportunities, and being visible. So I'll take this opportunity now to walk you through each of these and their relevance to moving up in the ranks based on these women's perspectives. So wanting change is a core dimension, as was mentioned, around which all other dimensions were centered. Their desire for change emerged from several conditions, such as a need for change in the profession, strained police-community relations, a palpable atmosphere of discrimination and harassment, and having legitimate power. So this is what pushed these women to want change. They knew that the only way to achieve the level of change they wanted was to move to executive level positions. That offered them legitimate power to make and have significant impact. And wanting change is what pushed the participants to increase their visibility, make opportunities, and take chances. This all resulted in them moving up the ranks to positions of power, despite being faced with challenges, despite having to file lawsuits, despite being harassed and being discriminated against throughout their journey. The next primary dimension, which came up in the dimensional analysis, is being visible. What the women realized was increasing visibility and being seen was a recurring theme throughout the interviews. This was really important, and participants articulated that in order to get promoted, to get assignments, to get opportunities, in order to make changes, to move up the ranks, to have the power to change the current status quo, they needed to be visible. For the women in this audience, you need to be visible based on these women's perspective, both inside as well as outside the department. Being visible meant showing up and being present. It meant being vulnerable in order to show connections with others, both inside the department and in the community. Participant 1 said, you got to be visible. You have to step out of your comfort zone. So saving a seat for a sister was an intentional and strategic act that would allow more women to be seen and heard. Participant 15 shared with me that she had to do a resume and a spreadsheet for a meeting with her supervisor because she recognized that that no matter what she did, he seemed to never be aware of everything she's doing, even though she was extremely active and involved in multiple activities and tasks. This might seem simple, but we need to recognize and understand the significance of this, because a resume is not something that's typical within the law enforcement profession. And so for many law enforcement officers, and certainly not for men. So as a woman in this department, mid-sized department, she had to put together a resume for her supervisor, who she's been working with for years, for him to have a sense of what she was doing. The next dimension was making opportunities. As participants moved up the ranks, it became clear that they needed to make opportunities for themselves, because unfortunately, things were not equally available for females as it was for their male counterparts. And for the women of color who were in the study, it was not as available as it was for their white female colleagues. So they accepted that not all opportunities would be offered to them equally and equitably. And so they had to make opportunities. They had to remain flexible, putting themselves in positions to be lucky. That was one of the quotes from one of the participants. They also recognized that it was never only about self, but making opportunities meant collaborating with others at different levels, a practice which benefited the participants as well as others with whom they engaged. So making opportunity led to participants having increased visibility, building a robust resume which defined a well-rounded career, and in some instances led to negative impacts on the participants' families, like divorce, losing their children, etc. The next is taking chances. Taking chances and the way it was conceived of and carried out is highly related to gender. Again, all that I'm sharing with you is from the perspective of these women. Their voices are centered in this analysis. Taking chances means taking risks, being strategic and being courageous. It means having grit and determination, which is strengthened by participants' resilience. Policing as a profession, though, promotes and favors male risk-taking, but it shuns women who try to step into that space, often attaching labels to these women. So women have a much bigger challenge when taking chances compared to their male counterparts. But they knew that despite the high stakes, taking chances was needed for career advancement. Taking chances allowed them to get into spaces they otherwise would not have gotten into. And taking chances was important for change to occur, the driving force behind each of the participants moving up the ranks to positions of legitimate power. So what all is happening here? The core dimension analysis the dimension analysis, is centered around the core dimension of wanting change. Being visible, making opportunities, taking chances, all played a critical role in the journey of these 21 women to top positions. The analysis revealed a web of connections, influences, and impacts. I remember at one point feeling absolutely overwhelmed that I had the responsibility of telling these women's incredible story. And participants 20s helped, what she said to me really helped to push me through. She said, I think your mind and your soul will just help you write, Miss Nikki. You will tell it the way it was supposed to be told. And I have to believe that whatever that looks like and sounds like, it's going to be right and perfect. And I can't wait to read it. All that was really important. And so if you recall, as I said earlier, this was two methodologies, grounded theory and situational analysis. The situational analysis helped me to explore and understand the meso and macro levels of analysis, or the broader social context. I wanted to know what were the other factors outside of the individual level factors that impacted their journey to the top. I looked at the collective entities and the nature of the relationship between those collective entities. It helped illuminate the power dynamic that existed and represented a diversity of realities and experiences that impacted the individual's journey to the very top. So you will see a lot of different things happening on that, and it shows four domains emerging: a policing space, a political space, an economic space, and a socioeconomic space. And again, I can't get into all the details, so I had put my link in the chat. So there's an interplay among the dimensional factors, that's individual level factors, all taking place within this policing space in which participants exist, but in many cases are never really fully embraced and accepted. P19 said, I walked into a culture that I just wasn't ready for. It was male dominated, a lot of racism, a lot of sexism, a dominant culture. Other groups, even though they were not from different backgrounds, kind of mirrored the dominant culture. P16 said, the sergeant came in and said in front of the lead officer that I would really do well in the squad as long as I remember the squad motto. The squad motto was I and I. I said, I don't know what that is. He said, intoxication and intercourse. So as they move within this policing space up the ranks from recruit to executives, there are different degrees of control or perceptions of control. They're taking more chances and making more opportunities as their want for change gets stronger and their recognition of and the importance and need for being visible grows. They learned that to move to the top positions, they had to learn to navigate these larger sociocultural, economic, and political spaces. Participant 10 said, it's not so much with race in my agency than political connections. So the people that are in the most powerful positions are connected somehow politically to the establishment. That means that there's a lot of politics within a police department. For these women, it was a constant maneuvering through these complex spaces. So the theoretical model which emerged was a web of intersection, or the web of intersection, which speaks of the challenges of untangling and understanding a world that has never belonged to them or embraced them. These are the women. This is what they thought. This is what they shared. Yet despite that, they were able to, with determination, resilience, and agency, reach top executive leadership positions. There's a constant movement and negotiation that these women must participate in at various levels while managing the expectation of what a woman should represent in policing, both within and outside the department and the profession. The data revealed that there are conflicting voices and narratives telling us who and what a woman should represent and what she should strive to achieve in policing, defining what position she's suited for, or how far she should be allowed to go. So there are strong cultural elements spanning centuries within and outside of policing space that have defined who and what a police officer should look like. For these women, it was a relentless process. They're not simply in a context, they're in a situation and are active agentic players in that situation that is dynamic, fluid, and constantly changing. And so out of this emerged I proposed three theoretical propositions to point to the patterns that emerged between, between the dynamic participant scripts and the studied situations. What was revealed was the reality that these women are not simply being acted upon. Opportunities are not simply being handed to them, but rather they're acting and being active and intentional participants in their own journey. The propositions are intended to help lead the research and practice in the future. So proposition 1 was really about women were intentional, agentic, and deliberate. Things were not just happenstance. Proposition 2 shows that visibility was for a purpose and oftentimes planned. If you want change, you must make yourself visible. And proposition 3, which supports Dr. Todak's research, support came in many different forms, from many different sources at different times and was contextual. So within my research, it wasn't just about mentoring, it was networking, it was all sorts of support from different sources of support, whether it be family, friend, or colleague. The type of support needed or sought and utilized was dependent on the situation and where the participant was along her journey. This is an interesting and unique part of this learning. Support is situation dependent. Intersectionality emerged also as an important factor in these women's journeys and is an important part of this journey not to be ignored. Our reality and the impact of those realities make our journey different. And it's okay, but it needs to be better understood. The quote that's on the page, this is one example of many quotes. This was the hardest part of putting this presentation together. As I mentioned, there were over 300 pages of interview notes. Many white females would not have had the experience participant 18 had growing up traveling from Texas to Alabama 2 to 3 times a year and seeing how law enforcement treated her father. That impacted her and her decision to join law enforcement and also to move to executive leadership positions. So the implications for leadership practice and change in this research, really law enforcement is experiencing a crisis in diversity. There's severe underrepresentation of women and racial and ethnic minorities. There's a demand on law enforcement to act and lead differently. We're in this moment when law enforcement leaders are being asked to lead with dignity and respect, to restore legitimacy and accountability, and are being encouraged to recognize the importance of rebuilding trust among their staff and within communities they serve. So what came out of this study was that there needs to be an implementation of policies that will enable women and diverse populations to thrive as they move up the ranks and not simply survive. Policing needs to foster a culture of professionalism that produces a work environment conducive to productivity, no matter the gender or diverse background. And for law enforcement to show up differently, they must encourage more diversity, inclusion, and flexibility throughout the rank and file among leadership. They must change the way that they operate. And with that, I say thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Nikki. Always a pleasure learning from you. And there's so much complexity to the results there. Really appreciate you condensing it down for us. You know, it's interesting that "save a seat for the sister" phrase, I think, is really sort of reverberating through the field a little bit. I had an experience at a meeting at the FBI National Education Council where I had that happen to me, and the woman who saved the seat for me, she had a seat saved by someone who'd had a seat saved by the chief that you're talking about. So it really is sort of making its way through the profession. All right, I know we're coming up close on time. We've got till 4:15, but I'm going to turn things over now to Katie to tell you a little bit more about how this is actually applying at an individual agency. We've been talking a lot about sort of macro level insights, but she's going to share with you some hot off the presses results of some surveys and interviews they did with the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department.
Thanks, Mo. Thanks, Dr. Todak and Dr. Smith-Kea. I'm going to talk about some similar points just in one agency. And so you'll see some common themes in what I'm talking about as well. I put in the chat the link to the two reports that I'm going to briefly cover. They cover more than promotions. So we've pulled out the promotions related takeaways from those two reports. Encourage you to look at both of them. So I didn't do this research all alone. In fact, I was a supportive person on it. So I wanted to shout out to to the lead researchers, Sarah Lawrence in particular. She has moved on from CJI and now is working for the National Policing Institute, and Joanna Abaroa Ellison, who works for Arnold Ventures now. Both of them were integral in the interviewing portion and the survey portion of the reports I'll be talking about. So we had two phases of the project. LVMPD was kind enough to say yes when we said, hey, can we do some research on women in your agency and talk through some of the common themes, develop more information about some of the points that we felt like needed to be hammered home further. So we did two things. The first phase was some one-on-one interviews with women in leadership positions. And the second phase was a survey that we distributed to all women officers across all of the ranks. And so the goals of this work were to increase understanding and of the backgrounds and experiences and some of the challenges that women in policing within this agency experience. And then I've given, a rundown of some of the questions that we talked about in both of those phases. So I'm just have one or two quick slides on the leadership report and the findings from that particular study. So this was interviews of 12 one-on-one interviews we conducted. Over on the right, you'll see the breakdown of ranks that we were able to talk to. Their average tenure was 20 years within the organization, and we asked them about recruitment, retention, promotion, of course, and work environment. So I'll just focus in on the promotion portion of those interviews. So we asked them if there were any department policies that were thought to have particularly positive or negative impact on women officers. And the consensus was that almost all of LVMPD's formal policies were unbiased and neither positively or negatively impacted women officers, except for the policy and practice around being pregnant on the job and returning to work following maternity leave. So the quote that you see was from one of the interviews. It's not fair that he could promote while I'm pregnant, but I can't promote while I'm pregnant, was a theme that we heard among some of the leaders. And then when we did the survey as well. That said, we did this research in the fall and spring of 2022. Organization has changed a little bit. And so, you know, I don't want to say that the policy is still the same. There might be people from LVMPD here that can speak to it, but basically in sum, what they told us was that, and this might be true for other agencies, was that being placed on light duty because of a pregnancy put a pause on their promotion potential, and that was seen as a setback for them and inequitable. We asked women leaders about the extent to which they considered the promotional process, which involves both that written and oral exam, to be fair and unbiased. And so what we heard was a little bit similar to what Dr. Todak talked about. With the written exam, they told us that they felt like that was pretty unbiased, but for the oral exam, views were a little bit more varied. Some believed it was more biased than others because of the subjective basis of the oral exam and the impact on an individual's reputation, the strength of their relationships with personnel higher up in the department, and whether they had advocates in those spaces. In the same vein, some of the women leaders talked about having more difficult time than men building relationships with work colleagues, which is necessary in networking for almost any field, but specifically in the organization, because doing so often involves spending time outside of work, which was impactful, but also wanting to make sure that no one thought they were doing anything inappropriate in those spaces, which was specific to their gender. So there's more to this particular report, but I'm going to move forward. Those were the highlights for the promotion section of it. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the promotions related findings that we had for the survey that we did. There we go. So real quick on the methodology, it was an online survey that we circulated to 330 women officers at LVMPD over a 2-week period. The response rate was about 60%. We felt that was pretty good. The responses are largely reflect what you see on the right. So most of them were police officer 1 and 2 positions. Some leadership also responded to that survey, but the majority of them were officers in that police officer 1 and 2 level. So related to recruitment and promotion, we asked about their interest in being promoted. Dr. Todak talked a little bit about this too. So for this specific agency, the most common reason for an expressed interest was access to new or different opportunities. And of the 75% who expressed that interest, about a third said that they were interested in experiencing different opportunities. Feeling ready for the next level after achieving a sense of competence in their current role was also mentioned. And I'd like to note that less than 10% said that a higher salary or benefits was driving their interest in promotion. It really was the opportunity that drove it. We asked them about their interest in being promoted at some point in the future. So for officers who were not interested in being promoted, and this was about 25% of the respondents, half said it was because they were happy and they were content with their current rank and assignment. And a notable share of other responses speaks to the complexity of factors behind wanting to move up the ranks or not. We asked survey respondents to agree or disagree with a couple of statements related to career advancement, so I wanted to highlight those. I would say a striking 93% agreed that there are opportunities to advance their career within the agency, which is good because, again, when they're looking for promotion, it is because of that opportunity. And the large majority of officers reported that they were encouraged to seek a promotion by superiors or their peers, meaning that the agency really was trying to lift people up when they felt like they were ready to do so and advocating for their promotion. Some women officers expressed concerns or that they didn't know enough about the promotional process itself. And so we asked respondents their feelings on fairness and transparency of that process and got some mixed results here, noted by the 3 colors that you see pretty prominent on the graphic. Half of the respondents disagreed that gender is not a factor in promotions. 40% believe that the promotional process is transparent, but 29% disagreed and 32% didn't know. All of that to me is indicative of just, the agency needing to make that a bit more transparent and helping people understand what is involved in the promotional process to its entirety. So if I sum it up here at the end, these are the larger takeaways from both of the reports. But if I focus in on promotions, women in leadership tell us that the written exams are fair. Oral exams introduce some bias. That's not really news. The networking aspect of the job is a challenging point for women because of the need to socialize outside of work. The survey indicated that most women feel like opportunities were there, and when they express an interest in promoting, it's because of those opportunities, not salary. And the survey also indicated the lack of solid foundation for whether the agency's promotion process was fair, unbiased, and transparent. Only that 35 to 40% range was sure that it was good, leaving room for improvement on that front to make it easier for people to make that decision. That's really important. Oops, wrong direction. So I just wanted to shout out to Deputy Chief Prosser and Kelly McMahill for helping us do this research at LVMPD. We really learned a lot in the process as well. If you have any questions about this, my email address is there. I think Mo said that we're sharing the slides, and then the link to both reports are there for you in the chat.